Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a few moments once it looks like everyone's done entering the webinar. I think we can get started. Good afternoon, and welcome to our series of webinars focused on bringing you information about COVID-19, infection control, and other nursing home-related topics. The information in these weekly webinars is geared toward long-term care and skilled nursing facilities, but we encourage everyone who's interested to attend. My name is Kathy Caudill. I'm a communications specialist with Quality Insights. Today's webinar is Minimum Dataset Changes Are Coming. Everyone has entered the meeting on mute, but we will have a Q&A following the presentation. If you have questions or comments, please submit them using either the chat or the Q&A tool in your Zoom menu. We invite you to join us every Wednesday for more of our weekly webinars. Next week's webinar will be a replay session of our August 28th webinar, Best Practices for the Respiratory Season, followed by a live Q&A. If you're interested in joining, that will be the same time and place next Wednesday at 2 p.m. And now I'd like to introduce our guest today, Debra Wright. Debra is a quality improvement specialist at Quality Insights. She joined our team after being in the long-term care industry for more than 30 years. She has a wealth of experience in long-term care nursing and management, ranging from certified nursing assistant to vice president of healthcare operations. She is most passionate when working with the MDS process and quality improvement. Debra, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Kathy. So this session will certainly be a lot less challenging than what last year's session was at this time, where it took us a whole month to get through all of the changes that would have been happening October 1st. This year, we can, just do it in this quick little short session, and we've also added some helpful tools that Quality Insights has in some of the areas that have been changed. So here are just some helpful links of where you can find the MDS forms, the RAI manual, as well as CMS's YouTube channel, where they have lots of sessions on MDS and different sections of the MDS. This is the most current RAI manual version starting October 1st of 2024. So you want to make sure, if you have any of those paper copies, that you are using version 1.19.1, and the date's October 2024. These are where the changes are located in regards to chapters 2 and 5, and then the sections for chapter 3, where we're just going to talk briefly about some of the clarifications and additions that they have for this year. So jumping right in with section A, not too much has changed. They just, they actually removed a part. So in the section that talks about the medication reconciliation list to a subsequent provider at discharge, in section A2121 and A2122, this section has been removed on the standalone Part A PPS discharge. So if they are remaining in your facility and they're coming off of Part A PPS, we do not need to code that we talked to the same staff. We don't need to prove that we talked to if they were moved from one unit to another unit. Obviously, we still need to do that. That still needs to be part of our process and a handoff, but we don't have, that's been removed from the MDS. Section C for the BIM summary, again, not a huge change here. They're just simply saying in the scoring for your summary score that on occasion you're going to have that resident that communicates but chooses not to participate in the BIMs, and therefore they don't attempt to answer any of the questions, and we would consider it incomplete. In that case, where they're able to communicate, we've done the interview, but they chose not to participate, the code would be 99 at C0500. What they clarified was if we should have done the BIMS, but we didn't, then the summary score needs to be dashed just like the sections are dashed. Functional abilities, a couple clarifications, and then one nice thing is the discharge goals. So column 2 from GG0130 and GG0170, they have been completely removed. So we no longer need to do the discharge goals. And then they just did some clarifications because I think they had a wrong word here where the coding in the example, they said the answer was code 02. I believe it was originally substantial / dependent assistance. And obviously we know that's the wrong wording. So they fixed that. And then they updated the example. I'm not going to read this. They just clarified this example and updated it to the correct verbiage for how you would code that particular example. Some more clarifications in regards to steps. If at the time of the assessment, the resident's unable to complete the step activity because of a physician prescribed restriction of no stair climbing, but yet they may be able to complete the stair activity safely by some other means, whether it's using a stair lift or, you know, how they sit down and they kind of scoot on their buttocks. If they can still complete those stairs by a different means, we code based on the assistance required to complete the activity, how they are completing the activity. They don't necessarily need to walk up the steps on 2 feet, but how did they get up 4 steps and up 12 steps? So we code based on their activity. On the same token, they then, you know, continued to clarify that if at the time of the assessment, the resident's unable to complete the stair activity because of a physician prescribed bed rest, then we would code the stair activity using the appropriate activity did not occur code. I said that wrong, using the appropriate activity not attempted code. And I just put them over here. Nothing has changed with that. These are the codes for the activity not attempted. Obviously, resident refused would not be pertinent to this scenario, but, you know, did we not do it because of their illness or injury or due to environmental or medical or safety concerns? So they could be on bed rest for a number of different reasons, and you would just choose the most appropriate based on the resident's situation. Again, the 4 steps, 12 steps, they clarified that while a resident can take a break while ascending or descending the 4 or 12 steps, once they start that activity, they have to be able to ascend or descend by any of their safe means. Again, whether it's walking, doing the stair lift, bumping on their buttocks, without taking more than a brief rest break to consider the stair activity as being completed. So again, as you can see, all of these things are very simple clarifications or updates that they've made for this October. Bowel and bladder, again, just a quick updated definition. They've added, for the external catheter, they've now included the female external catheter, such as those, what are they called, the PureWick systems, or any non-invasive urine output management system, or a system that collects that urine to a drainage bag. They've added the female definition to the external catheter. Active diagnoses. Here they have added septicemia as an actual diagnosis to kind of check that box, not include down in the additional diagnoses. So at I-2100, they've included septicemia now, and they've given the definition for sepsis to be considered septicemia. There needs to be that inflammation due to sepsis and evidence of a microbial process. So the medical record has to reflect that inflammation and have that evidence of the microbial process to code I-2100 sepsisemia. If it doesn't reflect both of those, then we would code sepsis at I-8000, the additional active diagnosis section. So that is a completely new diagnosis that they've added under section I. This is not new, so this is just a reminder as we're looking at sepsis. We're also looking then at UTIs, and just a reminder of the definition of UTI and how we code UTI, that it's a 30-day look back, and they have to meet both of this criteria in the last 30 days. It has to be determined that the resident had a UTI using that evidence-based criteria, whatever you use in your facility, whether it's McGear's, NHSN, or Loeb in the last 30 days. And the physician documented, that should be UTI diagnosis in the last 30 days. So just making sure that you have both of those criteria being met to code UTI. And here's just some additional resources that we have. You can click on the link to get all these. We've created a number of SBAR tools. So if you're working on that documentation with the physician, we followed McGear's to do these for most of them if they're infection related. So it has the criteria right there. You're having that physician documentation, you're documenting your signs and symptoms and your assessments. So these are additional tools that you can utilize if you don't have something within your system currently. Swallowing and nutrition status, again, very minimal change. They updated the definition of tube feeding. And while you can see there's nothing red here, they removed delivery of medications from the definition. So the feeding tube is the presence of the tube that delivers food and nutritional substances or fluids directly into the GI system. And they removed medication delivery from that definition, if that's the only thing that they were using the tube for. Medications, here they have added a new category of high-risk medications, and everything has stayed the same, but they've added anticonvulsant. So that's your common, there's lots of them out there, but the common ones are your Dilantin and your phenobarb. But what we also have to remember is those medications that fall into that classification, but they're used for other reasons. And that's okay as long as we have a documented reason. But we have the gabapentin. So how many of your residents are receiving gabapentin for that neurological or neuropathy pain? We have to remember that that's also an anticonvulsant, so we would code it there. How, the Depakotes, how many of our residents are dementia with behaviors and they have Depakote as one of their medication therapies? We just want to make sure that we're still coding them as anticonvulsants. So just making sure that you refresh your memory of what those anticonvulsants are, so that you're coding the classification, making sure that you have an indication documented for that. With all of these high-risk drug classifications, some other great resources that we have available to you are these high-risk medication checklists. So there's ones for psychotropics, your anti-diabetics, anticoagulants. So these are good things just to make sure that you have your processes in place, your good practices in place to follow if that's something that you need to do further education with your staff on those high-risk medications. Then under special treatments, procedures, and programs in section O, IV access, they simply put a clarification in there that the AV fistula does not meet the definition of an IV access. So if they have the presence of an AV fistula, we would not code IV access. pneumococcal vaccine, they updated multiple examples in the RAI to reflect the current up-to-date definitions of pneumococcal. I've given you the link here for the pneumococcal timing. They've said up to date means in accordance with the advisory committee on immunization practices and the recommendations, and lots of links here to all of that to make sure that you're on the same, you have the same understanding of what's up to date with pneumococcal, because anymore there are a lot of different combinations to count as being up to date. Here's a resource that we created that has gotten a lot of success through facility feedback that we've received, of an algorithm that you can kind of follow to see if your resident is up to date. If you're still struggling, or if you don't want to do this, that's not the way your brain thinks, there's also an app. It's called the Pneumorex Vax Advisor, and it asks you a couple identifying questions, date of birth, those kinds of things, and then dates of any pneumococcal vaccine that you're aware of, and then it'll tell you if that individual is up to date. Now, we all know that there's a Prevnar 21 that has been approved, but we've not received the guidance. So once we receive the guidance, we will update this algorithm and make sure that everyone gets a copy of it. But at this point, this is the current guidance as we know it. They've added a section, 00350, residents' COVID-19 vaccination status is up to date. And they did this one a little bit different than they did the flu and pneumo. It is simply a yes or no. Are they up to date or are they not up to date? And there's none of the declination, contraindications. They don't really, I don't want to say care, but it doesn't really matter what the reason is that they're not up to date. If they're not up to date, they're not up to date. That's a no, and you would code a 0. If they are, you would code a 1. They've given you the link of where you can go to see what the most current up-to-date definition is. And they've said, while you could have a dash, it should be very, very rare that you're using that dash as your coding for that. So again, this is just the instructions, which I think I've already said. You would code a 0 if they're not up to date. This includes the residents who have not received one or more recommended COVID-19 vaccine doses for any reason, including medical, religious, or other qualified exemptions. And it includes residents for whom you cannot determine what their vaccination status is. And then if they're up to date, you would code 1. Yes, they're up to date. Again, more resources that we have available to you. This is, again, an algorithm to see if they're up to date, and then some helpful education things that you can share with your residents as you're doing that education for the vaccine. The next 2 slides, one's for Pennsylvania, one's for West Virginia. These are immunization registries. So a number of places that administer vaccines, physician offices, pharmacies such as CVS, Walgreens, Rite Aids, all those, they enter any vaccine that they give into an immunization registry. While it's optional, many of these entities do utilize these registries. So you can go to the registry and put in the resident's name, date of birth, and it'll tell you whatever vaccines they received. Now, as a nursing home, most times we do not put those into the registry, but maybe if you've had a vaccine clinic and you've had a pharmacy come to your facility to assist with that, they may be using this registry as well. So here's the information for PA, and here's the information for West Virginia. And then I'm not going to get too much into the weeds with this correction request update, but they have there are now 4 cases where a manual deletion request is required. And the one that they've added is a record was submitted, was not for OBRA or Medicare Part A purposes. So basically, what this means is if you've erroneously submitted a record that was not for OBRA and Medicare Part A purposes, so maybe you're doing a managed care 14-day or 30-day, and you accidentally sent that and submitted that with your batch to CMS. CMS does not have the authority to collect that data, so we have to retrieve it. An inactivation request will not fix that. It won't make it go away because we're inactivating it, but it's still staying in their system. So they're saying we have to request that manual deletion from the CMS system, and you can go to Chapter 5 and get more information. I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that the inactivation doesn't negate the fact that you accidentally sent that record to CMS. So, any questions?
All right, thank you, Deb. If anyone has a question, please submit it using either the chat or the Q&A tool in your Zoom menu. You could also raise your hand if you'd like to ask your question out loud. And since we haven't received any questions yet, I'd like to run over some reminders. We'd again like to invite everybody to next week's webinar, which is going to be a replay session of our August 28th webinar, Best Practices for the Respiratory Season, which will be followed by a live Q&A. So that will be the same time and place next Wednesday at 2 p.m. We also invite you to bring your questions to our virtual live chats every Tuesday and Thursday at noon. One of our quality improvement specialists will be there to answer your questions on topics such as quality improvement initiatives, infection control, or MDS coding. You can find the links to those live chats and our webinars in the newsletter we send out every Friday called the Last Minute Lowdown. And if you would like to receive that newsletter but don't think you're on the mailing list yet, you can email me at ccaudill@qualityinsights.org and I will get you on that list. And I will drop my email in the chat shortly. I also dropped in the chat the link to today's presentation slides. So if you want to download any of those resources that Deb showed, you can do so by downloading the presentation slides. And I see Laura has raised her hand, so I've clicked where, Laura, you should be able to unmute yourself to ask your question now, if you are ready. Or if you didn't mean to raise your hand, you can lower your hand. I know that happens sometimes too. Okay, looks like Laura lowered her hand. If anyone has a question, please submit it using either the chat or the Q&A tool at this time. And I don't believe we've received any questions so far. Deb, is there anything else you'd like to say before we close out if we don't get any questions?
Nope. If anybody has any questions, you're welcome to reach out to me directly or attend one of our Tuesday, Thursday live chats at noon. But I think this October will definitely be a much easier transition than we had last year. So I think everybody will transition very well. But if you have any questions, you can always feel free to reach out to me and I'll be happy to assist.
All right, thank you, Deb. All right, so it doesn't look like we have any questions, so I think we can wrap up for today. Before we sign off, we'd like to ask everyone here to please answer a short evaluation of today's webinar. The evaluation is anonymous and will show as a pop-up as soon as the webinar ends. So if you have a couple minutes to fill that out, we would appreciate it. Deb, I'd like to thank you for joining us today and for this great presentation. And I'd like to thank everyone here for coming today, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.